600,000 people return home from prison in this country every year. And within 5 years, 75% will be back behind bars. I know this because I came home from prison in 2013, 2016, and because I'm an overachiever, 2019. A lot of the reasons people return to prison aren't because they're out committing new crimes. It's because of violations of technical administrative rules of parole. That means if you are out walking your dog at 8:05 p.m. and your curfew is 8 p.m., you go back to prison. If you have friends who are felons and your parole officer finds out, you go back to prison. Now, if you look at my rap sheet, society. And that's problematic because you expect me to be a good citizen, yet I am denied the tools that are required for me to execute as a good citizen. And I'm held accountable for those outcomes. Most people believe that we only lock up people who are evil, mean, scary, and bad, guilty. I used to believe it. Most of you probably believe it. But it simply isn't true. We believe this narrative because that's all we know. When police arrest somebody and take their mugshot, they issue a press release, it goes in the newspaper, and we consume that information for our own entertainment. There's no way to combat that narrative because people like me are silenced because we do not have access to power. We cannot combat that narrative because we also have felony disenfranchisement rules for voting. So that whole taxation without representation thing that America was founded on, people are really quick to strip that right to vote away from us when we're convicted. And when I could finally vote, I couldn't get to the polls because I wasn't allowed to drive. I worked 2 jobs. My dog has to go to the bathroom before curfew, and I couldn't make it back from the polling station in time for me to ensure that I could maintain my freedom by exercising my right to vote. I finally was released from parole when I was accepted into graduate school. I had to ask my parole officer permission to accept the offer. It was humiliating, but I knew that that would be my opportunity to make a difference in this country. And I was able to build a life of purpose. And I gave the narrative of the transformational arc of education life. But here's the thing. I was not broken. I didn't need to be fixed. I needed opportunity. None of us are broken. Our systems are broken. Today, I use my MBA every day in my role at JSTOR, where I ensure that people who are incarcerated have access to good quality information, which is the basis of building a good, solid, truthful narrative. And how do I know this? When I was at Bard Prison Initiative, I had access to JSTOR, and I got lost in those archives because I fell in love. And he's the smartest, wittiest, most eloquent, charming, fashionable guy ever. And you might know him because he's kind of famous. And his name is Oscar Wilde. I have 35,000 pages of research that I accumulated while I was a student at Bard Prison Initiative. And I wasn't even writing a paper about Oscar Wilde. But he was frenemies with George Bernard Shaw. And he was like the original Kardashian, famous for being famous before, anyone could break the internet. And I got to identify as a scholar because as I started to read criticism about Oscar Wilde, I could say, I don't believe that, or the author of this is taking this entirely out of context. This is during the French symbolism era, and he was still doing the aesthetic movement. Like, I reject that. And that was not on my bingo card. But the whole time I thought that I was looking for information like what color velvet pants he had on when he came to America. What I was really learning was how to understand the world I was living in by being able to find information that was important to me. And here's something that's really remarkable, is that when I was a student at Bard Prison Initiative, there were over 2 million people in our prisons. That doesn't include the people who were in our jails. Only 15,000 of those 2 million people had access to college. And out of those 15,000 people, less than 1,000 had access to an academic library like I had. That's remarkable. And JSTOR built this thing so that we could conduct independent academic research, because many years before I was a student at Bard Prison Initiative, Bard went to JSTOR and asked them to build this thing so that the experience of college inside a prison most closely could match the experience of a student on a traditional college campus. So my experience was rare. Not anymore, because today, over 400,000 incarcerated students on 3 continents have access to an academic library because of the work that we are doing. And this enables people, thank you, who are incarcerated to identify good information. I had never seen peer-reviewed material before, but now I can identify bad information because I know what's good. And I can accept and reject things based on what I know to be true. So people need to have access to information and then know what to do with it. And here's another thing about prisons. They are information deserts. There are rules about what kinds of things we're allowed to have and read. And so, for instance, up until recently in Florida, you could read Mein Kampf all day long and nothing by Malcolm X. Great for white supremacy, terrible for Black liberation. And that's normal. So if people don't have access to anything different, all we're doing is reinforcing what they already know and believe. And how is that part of a transformational arc that society expects us to perform for you, right? These prison review policies actually reinforce that whole idea of fake news, right? So fake news is really a composition of a couple of different things. So misinformation, which is, if I were to tell you that I was walking my dog at 8:15 instead of 8:05, doesn't really change the context of the point, but it's still not entirely accurate. No harm done, right? Disinformation would be leaving out the part where I did not have the express written permission of my parole officer to have a dog in the first place. Malinformation, we don't have to look any further than January 6th to see what the consequences of malinformation can be. But I'm just going to call all of this fake news from here on out. And why does fake news matter? Big tech resists the regulations that would enable truth and honesty to prevail in the spaces that we inhabit. It's engineered for a response, because a response equals engagement. Engagement means clicks, and clicks means money for Google and Twitter or X, whatever we're calling it now. And that is at the expense of a good, just functioning society where facts are facts, not alternative facts, right? It ensures that we stay mad at the wrong stuff. For instance, we have people who are dying in other parts of the world because of problems that we, as the United States, has created. And when they tried to immigrate to our country, we're obsessed that they're getting something that we are owed, or we don't want them because we believe that they're going to take something that they didn't earn. But we really need to ask, are they running away from something, or are they running toward the promise of our country? Because I got to tell you, we are only 5% of the world's population, but are 25% of the global prison population. And I guarantee you they are not coming here for freedom. So the other component is climate change is driving a lot of this migration. And they are the harbingers of what we can expect. There are sea lions floating around Park Avenue in New York City because of the flooding. And there's this saying that you watch these crazy videos about climate change and they don't seem real until you are the one taking the video, right? So climate change is here and we are feeling it in our prisons. But we're so confused about what is important and what matters, and don't do the crime if you can't do the time. But we sentence people to a period of confinement. We do not sentence them to death because they're baking in their prison cells, because these prisons were built 100 years ago before it was over 100 degrees for more than a month at a time in some of these southwestern states. And do we as a society want to be known as the place where people can go and serve a sentence to pay their debt to society? And climate change kills them in their prison cells. But if we are so convinced that we're arguing about whether climate change is real, whether migration is good or bad, we're not focusing on the things that really matter. And that's why access to good information is so crucial and important. Everyone should have the opportunity to find what is deep and purposeful and meaningful for themselves, to find a way to contribute, and to be allowed to fully participate in society. There are 78 million Americans who have a conviction history in this country. Why are we being excluded when we have solutions? Because we have experienced many of these calamities ourselves firsthand. Arming people while they're incarcerated with the ability to identify and combat fake news by letting them have access to good, solid, real, truthful information, well, it empowers them to take charge of their lives, to engage fully as informed citizens, so they don't just click like or send, but they can think critically about the messages that they are putting forth into the world. That's how we get a more just, inclusive, and equitable society. So the key to liberation does not lie in understanding the harm caused by fake news, but in our collective commitment to foster a world where that truth can prevail. And having access to tools like JSTOR in those spaces is foundational, so we all can sort out fact from fiction. So everyone can find Oscar in the archives, but Oscar may not do it for some of you. That's okay, because there's something for everybody in carceral spaces inside that archive, and they might fall in love with physics. They might fall in love with space or the earth, or they might just discover their humanity in between those pages, because that's where I learned that I'm okay. And I was able to recognize the humanity in others when I just thought I was looking for Oscar's velvet pants. And that opportunity is available to every single one of you who has access to good, solid, quality information. Because if a platform isn't meeting your needs, you can leave it. It's not a law. You can vote with your feet. And that way, these companies that are profiting from fake news will have to go somewhere else. And that'll make society better for all of us. And arming 78 million people with the tools for their own liberation will enable us to elect a president, a legislative body that is going to work for all of us. Thank you.